What if the one forgotten habit you ignore tonight is the only thing standing between your broken marriage and total healing? Deep in the dust-choked hills, Enoch's calloused thumb scraped the jagged edge of an unpaid land token as the harsh 30-degree mountain wind cut through the gaps in his wooden door. Across the dim, flickering hearth, the cold scent of burnt barley hung heavy between him and Miriam. She did not look up. Her knuckles were stark white as she shoved the last of her woolen shawls into a battered leather travel satchel, the rusty buckle clicking shut like a drawbridge, locking him out forever. For 7 years, the suffocating weight of 300 silver pieces in debt had turned Enoch's voice into sharp gravel and Miriam's heart into ice. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the packed dirt floor, reaching out to touch the fraying strap of her bag, but she flinched away, leaving only the hollow scrape of a wooden stool pulling back. His throat burned with 1,000 frantic explanations about the failed harvest and the dry well. Yet the space between them remained dead silent, wider than the mile-wide gorge outside their cabin. Miriam walked toward the doorway, her footsteps echoing against the cold stone threshold, leaving him standing alone in the shadows with a home that had become a graveyard of unspoken words. Then, through the howling wind outside, a sharp, deliberate knock rattled the heavy oak door. Enoch pulled open the heavy oak door, allowing a sharp gust of freeze-bitter air to sweep pine ash across the flagstones. On the threshold stood an old traveler, his wool cloak coated in gray dust, carrying a twisted cedar staff that tapped hollowly against the rock. Without a word, the man stepped past the doorway, his keen eyes instantly catching Miriam's packed satchel resting beside her boots and the icy space separating the couple. Enoch reached for his iron coin pouch, preparing to turn the stranger away, but the traveler raised a weathered hand and set a small brass hourglass onto the center of the wooden table. The yellow sand inside remained completely still, trapped by a tiny bronze latch at its neck. The old man looked directly at Enoch, his voice low and smooth like grinding millstones, stating that when a home fills with the noise of unsaid resentments, even 300 silver coins cannot purchase a single moment of real peace. Miriam paused, her hand freezing on the brass latch of the door as the smell of wild sage drifted from the traveler's mantle. The stranger leaned over the table, unhooking the latch on the hourglass, letting the fine grains begin their steady, silent fall through the glass. He challenged Enoch directly, asserting that he was fighting the wrong battle by chasing dead out in the fields while letting his marriage bleed to death in the shadows of this room. Enoch gripped the back of a wooden chair until his knuckles turned yellow, staring at the falling sand as the old man offered a final, binding choice: give him 1 hour of absolute, unyielding silence together before sunrise, or let Miriam walk out that door forever. The trickling sand inside the brass hourglass clicked against the bottom glass, a tiny metallic pulse against the howling wind outside. Enoch stared at the stranger's weathered face, then slowly turned toward Miriam, whose fingers remained locked around the leather strap of her satchel. The traveler took a sip of lukewarm spring water from his clay canteen, the scent of damp earth rising as he set a carved wooden token onto the ash-dusted table. He spoke gently, his voice carrying the weight of ancient roads, revealing 3 short histories of couples who stood at the same precipice. He spoke first of a sea merchant in a northern coastal port whose trading vessels sank under towering waves, leaving him bankrupt and drowning in bitter arguments with his wife. Instead of screaming over lost gold, the couple agreed to sit together on a cold stone wharf every sunset for 60 minutes, completely silent, watching the gray tide roll in until they remembered that their shared breath meant more than broken timber. Next, he described a mountain blacksmith who labored 20 hours a day at his red-hot forge to pay off heavy taxes, leaving his wife isolated in a dark valley. The blacksmith forced himself to drop his iron hammer every Saturday at dusk, sitting beside her beneath an ancient pine tree without offering a single excuse or defense, simply letting his physical presence prove that she was worth more than his daily toil. Finally, the stranger told of two noble lovers whose palace burned to ash. Leaving them bitter and distant, they restored their broken bond by sitting on the stone edge of an old well at dawn, silently recalling one single moment of forgotten warmth from their earliest years until gratitude melted their anger. As the last parable faded into the quiet room, Enoch felt a sharp stain in his chest. Looking at his own cracked leather boots and the cold, unlit hearth, he took a heavy step forward, grabbed his heavy iron lantern from the peg near the door, and unlatched the heavy brass lock with a loud, decisive clang. He looked Miriam dead in the eye and swore that if she gave him just one chance to build that sacred quiet tonight, he would never let the noise of the world tear them apart again. Miriam lowered her satchel onto the cold floorboards, the heavy iron clasp striking the wood with a sharp thud that echoed through the quiet cabin. The old traveler nodded once, collected his cedar staff, and dissolved into the swirling mountain mist outside, leaving the room in heavy stillness. Enoch picked up his rusted hand axe and stepped out into the freezing night, the sub-zero wind burning his lungs as he marched up the rocky crest behind their home. Beneath the sprawling, ancient oak tree where they had once carved their names, he cleared away jagged stones and thick frost with his bare hands. He dragged a heavy, fallen oak log across the frozen earth, wedging it firmly between two granite boulders to construct a crude wooden bench facing the dark valley. His hands bled from the sharp bark, and the bitter cold turned his breath into thick white plumes. Yet he refused to stop until the seat was secure. He sat down alone on the rough timber, the quiet pressing against his ears like a physical weight while his mind raced with panic about unpaid debt tokens and empty grain sacks. He forced his eyes shut, taking a ragged breath of pine-scented air, refusing to run back to the house or scream at the silent sky. 10 minutes passed into 20 as the overwhelming urge to calculate his losses slowly faded, leaving only the sound of rustling oak leaves above his head. He looked down toward the cabin window and caught the faint, flickering glow of a single tallow candle moving across the glass as Miriam stepped out onto the frost-covered threshold. Miriam's woolen shawl flapped violently against the freezing wind as her leather soles crunched over the icy slope, her silhouette halting 5 feet from the oak tree. Her eyes remained guarded, tracking the red scratches on Enoch's knuckles and the frost clinging to his beard. She asked him directly if this quiet bench was just another trick to make her accept a life choked by debts and endless silence. Enoch did not offer excuses, nor did he mention the 300 silver coins or the landlord's tally book. Instead, He slid to the far edge of the wooden bench, leaving a cold, clear space on the rough timber beside him, and held out his hand toward the valley below. He spoke softly, stating that the bench was not meant to fix their past, but to give them one safe place where the noise of the world could not force them apart. Miriam stood frozen in the 20-degree air, her knuckles tightening around her shawl as the mountain wind howled through the dry oak branches. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her shadow stretching across the granite boulders, and dropped her satchel onto the hard dirt. Moving with measured caution, she pulled her cloak tight and sat down on the far side of the timber. Keeping 3 inches of empty space between them, the icy stillness settled over them like a heavy wool blanket, unbroken except for the steady rhythm of their frosty breath rising together into the dawn air. For 3 consecutive evenings, Enoch and Miriam returned to the oak bench as the twilight temperature dropped toward 15 degrees. They sat side by side, watching pale smoke rise from distant homestead fires while the cold wind rustled the pine needles around them. On the 4th evening, Miriam's body remained stiff, her hands trembling inside her coarse woolen sleeves as she stared down at her worn leather boots. A quiet tear spilled over her lashes, tracing a wet line down her wind-chapped cheek before falling onto the frost-covered bench between them. Enoch did not speak, nor did he offer defensive excuses about the 300 silver coins still owed to the landlord. He slowly shifted across the rough timber, closing the 3-inch gap, and laid his rough, calloused palm over her trembling fingers. Miriam stiffened for a second, her breath catching in the freezing air, but she did not pull away. Her fingers gradually relaxed beneath his warm touch, her thumb gently tracing the hardened ridge of his thumb joint. They sat in absolute, sacred silence as the sun dipped behind the jagged western crest, leaving the sky painted in deep indigo and amber. When Enoch finally stood to guide her back down the steep dirt path, Miriam left her heavy leather travel satchel sitting unlatched beside the door, its rusty buckle remaining open and untouched. The icy distance that had held them captive for years had begun to crack. But as they reached the hearth, a sharp horse gallop echoed up the valley road, carrying an armed bailiff with a red wax scroll bearing an immediate notice of seizure. The bailiff's heavy iron-shod boots pounded against the stone threshold, casting a long, dark shadow across the unlit hearth. He unrolled the stiff parchment, its red wax seal gleaming under the tallow lamp, and announced that 30 days remained to pay the 300 silver pieces or lose the cabin and land forever. In years past, such a threat would have sent Enoch into a raging storm of excuses and caused Miriam to retreat behind locked doors in bitter resentment. Instead, Enoch stepped firmly between the officer and the table, placing his hand over Miriam's cold, trembling fingers as they rested on the rough pine grain. He looked the bailiff dead in the eye and stated calmly that the debt would be met. But their home would not be broken by fear. When the rider vanished back into the 10-degree mountain fog, the room remained dead silent, yet the atmosphere had completely shifted. Miriam did not reach for her packed leather travel satchel. Instead, she picked up a wooden spoon and began stirring the cold barley broth over the rekindled fire. As the savory steam filled the drafty kitchen, she looked up at Enoch and offered a quiet confession, admitting that for 7 long years she had believed he cared more about the coins than about her. but those quiet evenings under the oak tree had shown her he was still fighting for them. Enoch closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath as the icy wall between their hearts dissolved into the warm glow of the hearth. Yet as night settled deeper over the ridge, a howling blizzard began to rattle the timber shutters, threatening to bury the olive grove and destroy their final chance to harvest and clear the dead. Freezing gale-force winds howled over the ridge, driving 0-degree ice crystals through the cracks in the timber walls as snow buried the olive grove in 4 feet of drifts. Half the unharvested crop lay frozen beneath heavy ice, threatening to erase their remaining income and guarantee the seizure of their home. Panic flared in Enoch's chest as he grabbed his heavy wool cloak and iron lantern, preparing to rush blindly into the blizzard to salvage what remained. Miriam caught his forearm, her grip strong and steady, and pointed toward the door leading up the ridge. Without a word, they pushed through the blinding gale together, their boots sinking deep into the snow as they fought their way up to the ancient oak bench. The bitter storm roared around them, freezing their eyelashes and numbing their skin, yet they sat side by side on the snow-covered log, their shoulders pressed tight against the cold timber. They held hands beneath their frozen shawls, breathing the sub-zero air in absolute, unwavering silence, letting the stillness anchor their minds against the surrounding chaos. 10 minutes passed in quiet resolve, the pounding rhythm of their hearts displacing fear with unshakable unity. When they opened their eyes, Enoch did not see a hopeless tragedy. He saw a clear path forward. Standing up together, they worked side by side through the freezing night, burning oil braziers beneath the low olive branches to thaw the ice and salvage 300 bushels of pristine fruit before dawn broke. The crushing dead no longer possessed the power to shatter them, because the icy wall between their hearts was completely gone, replaced by a bond forged in silent presence. As the golden morning sun reflected off the snow-covered slopes, Enoch looked at Miriam, knowing only one final step remained to turn this quiet practice into a lifelong sanctuary. 1 year later, the 30-degree mountain chill settled over the ridge, yet the ancient oak tree stood silent and still against the indigo twilight. Enoch unlatched the heavy timber door of a cabin that smelled of wild sage and slow-roasting barley. Stepping out onto the frost-dusted path, he carried a small loaf of unleavened bread, its crust golden brown from the renewed hearth, and a clay jug filled with fresh spring water. He did not rush, the desperate, clawing panic over silver tokens or landlord tallies no longer hounding his footsteps. Miriam joined him at the threshold, pulling her thick woolen shawl around her, her hand instantly finding his calloused palm. They walked together up the steep dirt path to the weathered oak log, which they had smoothed and reinforced against the winter gales. They sat in absolute, comfortable silence, watching the distant village fires flicker on while a single bird called out to the settling night. The quiet no longer built a wall, it was the bridge they crossed every evening. Enoch broke the bread, the sound sharp in the stillness, sharing it with Miriam before they took measured sips from the clay cup. The 300 silver coins had been paid, but the true wealth remained in this stubborn, daily choice to stop, hold hands, and remember that their presence was the only sanctuary they truly owned. A lone tear, hot against the 15-degree air, slipped down Enoch's cheek, not from fear of loss, but from the raw gratitude that he had almost missed the very treasure he had been fighting to save. He looked at Miriam, her face soft in the fading light, knowing their home was rebuilt not with timber or coin, but with stillness, presence, and the forgotten habit of cherishing one another in the safe sanctuary of the silent dusk.